Okay, so welcome to Beauty of Colors podcast branch. It's great to have you on the show.
Cleanne, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to our time together.
You're very welcome. So tell the listeners about you and what was the driving force of you becoming a writer?
Sure, like many people in their lives, they have some goals and some dreams and some ambitions, and writing was never one of mine. It's kind of interesting, where we end up from where we started, but that's what the journey of life is about. I was raised in the 50s and the 60s. I grew up in a military family. So we traveled quite a bit. I lived in a lot of different countries and a lot of different cities. It was a great foundation for my early years, being exposed to different people and different cultures. And so, I had kind of an unusual upbringing from other than military brats who are the ones who kind of understand that journey. It's not like being in one place and growing up your whole life in a city or a town or a neighborhood. Mm-hmm. So after college, I went into corporate sales and management. I spent 15 years in that life, was very successful in a material sense, mm-hmm. and was very frustrated and disappointed in a personal sense. I wasn't growing the way I wanted to. I wasn't living up to the mask that I was wearing, in my sales and regional training roles. So it was good and bad. Like all things in life, there's some successes and some rejection. So my life was pretty average, pretty normal for someone in that world of corporate, opportunities and climbing that ladder. When I decided to leave the corporate world, I thought, I've got to do something else with my life because it's so unfulfilling. So I decided I needed to learn more about spiritual life. And so I spent the next 5 years studying Eastern religions and mysticism and, religions that were not of my growing up years. I was raised, so to speak, in a Christian home. That is, I like to say we were OCE. We were occasional Christmas and Easter Christians. We didn't practice and we didn't attend church much. I had the basic understanding. And so when I went on my journey, since I thought I knew about Christianity, I wanted to learn about the other spiritual belief systems and religions. So that's what I did. I spent some years studying those. What I found was they brought me right back to the foundation. I learned that each religion in its scriptural formation and foundation is actually very similar. That is, every master teacher, who had a connection to God fundamentally built their philosophy, their religious philosophy on love God first and most, and then, treat your neighbor as you want to be treated. And so realizing that all these scriptural groundings for these different religions were actually the same or very similar in terms of having a relationship with God and then applying that kind of relationship with your fellow man and woman, from there, that's where things kind of start to get creaky. When the master dies, and the void is filled by other followers because they are not the master, the humanness, the human nature of us sort of takes over. And so now 2,000 years, 6,000 years later, all of these religions, are similar and yet very different. And their practices are very different. And that's my opinion why so many people fall away from the religion that they might have grown up with or were exposed to. So my journey led me down that spiritual path. And at midlife, I had my midlife crisis, but instead of buying a Corvette, I decided, because I wanted to explore this spiritual balance in my life a little more, I went back and got a master's degree in theology. In conjunction with that adventure and experience, I wrote my first book, and now 25 years later, I've written 22 books.
Wow, 22 books. That's a great accomplishment. And what are your books about?
Well, I have four nonfiction books, which are about two are about spiritual grounding and growth. One is for aspiring authors about the self-publishing path, how to take your book or your book idea from manuscript to published book. And the fourth one is about intimacy, primarily for men, helping them to become better lovers. The other 18 are all fiction. They're all short stories, poetry, all dealing with adult contemporary life and the situations that we get ourselves into, the emotions that we go through, the failures and the successes and the rejection. The thematic focus of my, particularly my nonfiction books, is the power of truth, the link between choice and consequence, mm-hmm. and accepting or avoiding personal responsibility. So each of the stories deals with a situation or a character that the reader can identify with, either firsthand in their own life or possibly, through somebody that they know at work or in a family or extended family. And it deals with adult situations that, we manage to get ourselves in, and then what we try to do to extricate ourselves from the negative things and how we try to bolster the positive.
So you're both nonfiction and fiction?
Correct.
Okay, good. So what are the foundations of spiritual grounding? What would you say they are?
Well, we are all human. We're all animal creatures by nature, and yet we have a spiritual component within us. If you're a believer in God, and if then you believe God is spirit and the creator, and we are part of his creation, then we are also spirit. So when we're born, we're a combination of mind and body and spirit. And because we're born into the world and the world's ways are what we come to learn and are comfortable with, that's where we place our energies, is getting ahead in the world and doing the things that we believe the world will reward. And so not often, especially in our early years, teens and young adult and our career formation years, we are focused on getting ahead, providing for our basic needs and then all of the other things that we want. That spiritual component a lot of times is sort of on the back burner, and we may or may not be aware, that it exists, and we may or may not have had some exposure to it growing up or along our path. But many people, as they struggle with the pressure and the stress and the conflicts of daily life, often have a sense that there has to be more. I'm missing something here. The puzzle pieces are not fitting together. And I'm a believer that that's a situation where we're not cognizant of our spiritual part. We're focused on our human needs and our human wants. And yet that spiritual part is the part that can bring the balance, mm-hmm. and the calm and the peace, because it requires nothing of us other than belief and faith.
So when you say belief and faith in who?
Well, again, from a spiritual aspect, belief in something greater, mm-hmm. and outside ourselves. So for the Christian and the Jew and Islam, that is God. For Hindus and Buddhists, it's a multiplicity of God. So it's a power that we believe exists and that we have a connection to, whether it's voluntary or forced upon us. We have that option, that opportunity to have that connection. So it's a connection to something greater than and outside of ourselves. Ever since man came onto the scene in this world, even in the earliest of days when people lived in tribes and in caves, they experienced the world outside, the climate and the elements and the beasts that they had to contend with. Mm-hmm. And so because those things were always more powerful than we were, they were given God and mythical existence, right? I mean, fire, earth, water, all those things have a power greater than ours. So you naturally have to give it a place that is more powerful. So that was the first God concept. And that's been with us since the beginning. Then it's a matter of what does that look like? How much do I believe and invest in that? And what is the result of the consequence, blessing or punishment of that belief? So that's what it is. Faith, on the other hand, is the action of that belief, right? If I believe in God and his attributes and his character and nature, then the faith that I have in the truth of those concepts is what I put into action in my own life by my behaviors and my responses. And so we each have a choice as we go through life. In any situation or interaction with people or events or circumstances, I can respond one of two ways. I can respond as my human nature directs and desires me to respond. And that's fundamentally what's in it for me. What do I get out of it? What do I have to put into it to get my reward or my punishment? Because when we come into this world, the first concept that we are familiar with as children at about age 2, we come to understand what the word no means and what it represents. And the action of that concept and that word is reward or punishment, right? So we are taught that you either do something and it's right or you do something and it's wrong. And if it's right, you get a reward. And if it's wrong, you get punishment. So that's the concept that we grow up with from toddler and infancy. And because that's the way of the world, we all live in legal systems based on reward and punishment in order to determine our behaviors. Since that's the way of the world and we're part of the world, that's what we accept and use as our guidepost. The problem with that limited exposure of thinking is every situation I go into or respond to is based on, well, what's in it for me? And is my action going to be right and rewarded or considered wrong and punished? And what happens then is everything that I meet in life, all of my experiences are in this constant struggle of, is it right or is it wrong? When we get spiritually grounded with a reconnection or an initial connection with our God, and we start to have faith in those concepts, and our actions then are faith filled, what we find out is not only is it about right and wrong, but it's even deeper than that. Every decision or choice I have is fundamentally, will my response be moral and or ethical, or is it just going to be about reward and punishment? And when we make that jump or that elevation and consider the spiritual aspect of it, then that idea, what I decide and what I'm going to do, if it's moral and ethical, then the response for it not only affects me, but it affects my family, my spouse, my children, my neighbors, my community, because the decisions I'm making have a moral and or ethical component to them. And as soon as that's in the picture, then my action takes on a much larger role. And that's fundamentally the difference between someone who has a spiritual grounding and uses spiritual strength as part of their life. They look at choices not only from, is it right and wrong, is it moral and or ethical, and so that's the division point that I see experiencing daily life. Is what I'm going to do just about me, or are the effects and the fallout and the outcome of my choice going to affect other people that are important to me, my family, my neighbors, my job, my coworkers? And to do the moral and the ethical thing, then I'm coming from the better me, from the best I can be. I take off the mask of my worldly me and I see the truth. And that's what morality and ethics is about. Seeing the truth, living the truth, and understanding the truth. And the great thing about that leap, that jump, is when you look at the world and see the truth, then you automatically see the untruth in the world, the lies, the fabrications, and the falsehoods. Then the choice comes down to, Am I going to respond in my old human nature way because it's just about me? Or am I going to respond in a way that affects more than me? It affects the people that I love. So it's the ways path or the spiritual path. And that's not to mean it has to be one or the other. The ideal is to understand that you're a human with a spiritual component. And that spiritual component gives you an understanding and a strength to respond from a more place of love and truth.
Okay, well said. So, what are the 12 life lessons we all experience?
Wow. Okay, the 12 life lessons. Well, there's 12. The first 6 have to do primarily with our life here, right? These are the ones that we're most familiar with, especially in our everyday life and our job world, our career world. Let me go through them real quickly and I'll try and explain them. The base level is insecurity. We all come into the world and we all grow carrying some old baggage of insecurities, right? We're not all pleased with ourselves. I'm too short, I'm too fat, I'm too bald, I'm not smart enough, I'm not pretty enough, I'm not skilled enough. And these insecurities, as long as we allow them power, they will stay with us and be obstacles to our success moving forward. Once we get out of that base level of insecurity, then we can actually start to grow. So the first lesson on the path is responsibility. Will I take responsibility for my actions or will I avoid it? The next one is reliability. Since I've chosen to be responsible, am I reliable to be responsible every time? The next one is dependability. Now that I've proven that I'm reliable, I can be depended upon. So I do dependability. Once I can be depended upon, then I can be accountable. Once I'm accountable, then I have credibility. So all of these base steps are fundamentally building to a place of credibility. I am, responsible, dependable, reliable, and therefore I'm trustworthy for the task that you've given me or the task that I'm encountering. The 7th step is the real pivotal one, and it's risk. When we get to this place and we've pretty well got a handle on these first 5 steps, and we're clicking through life and everything's going pretty good because you're on all cylinders, then we have an opportunity to risk going to the next stage or the next level. For someone who's very satisfied, and very fulfilled being accomplished in these initial levels, there's nothing wrong with that. They're very dependable, very reliable, very accountable. But for the person who says, I need to keep growing, I want to grow more, what they're doing is they're risking then the unknown and stepping outside of these basic life skill fundamentals and going to a different level. So the 8th one is trust. Am I trustworthy? Can I be trusted? When I accomplish that and I am trustworthy, then can I make a commitment? And in being committed, when I get to that place, because I can understand both sides of an issue, both sides of a story, am I willing to be forgiven? And am I willing to forgive? And this is a tough one because it gets into all of our relationships, whether it's at home or at work. We all have situations where we and others, do things that we're not proud of, that we're embarrassed by, that we wish we could take back. But the key in that relationship is, can I be forgiven for what I said or did? And can I forgive for what someone said or did? Once we understand the power of forgiveness, then we're at a place where we can understand what truth actually means in our life. And once we see and know truth, we understand that the premise of life is love. So it's interesting that the first 5 are very male oriented. very career oriented, very job oriented, moving up that ladder of success. The last five are very female oriented. By our very nature, females exhibit trust, commitment, forgiveness, truth, and love as part of their innate nature. And where men are, grappling with those, that's why men hunt and women gather, right? The men are out doing the physical stuff and all the tactical tested stuff. And the women are the nurturing ones who are actually holding things together. So the key is to move through this group of life lessons, because the challenge is, how do I, when I get through one, we go, okay, I did that, and I was successful, and I'm responsible. Well, at the same time, life then throws another one at us. Okay, you've done a good job there. Well, let's look at trust. Let's look at accountability. So life is always in flux. You're always, coming into contact with situations or people or events that are testing your ability to confront whatever that challenge is with all of these strengths, with the strengths of these lessons. And so that's why it's very difficult for men initially to grapple with trust and commitment and forgiveness and truth and love, because we're busy trying to prove, our alpha place, because we're responsible, reliable, depending. We bring home the bacon, right? And so the males generally do well in the bottom group, and the females generally are more easily accessed in the top group. Well, in our life today, because so many crossover opportunities, women have to go and battle in that 5 group, especially in career or job situations. And men have to understand and battle the top group, the other 5, more often in their home situations, right? And so this is the struggle. This is the lessons of life that we're all trying to learn at the same time. And they're coming at us, bullet speed. But the key is, when you are confident and when you learn the power of each of these, then each time you're tested, you can take on the test without, too much trouble. You've been there, you've done that, you know what works, and you move ahead. So you use your strengths to accomplish the next needed goal. But because you're successful at one group, then you have to risk taking on the other group and see if you can become a more complete and more balanced individual. The more balanced you become, the more growth filled you become, and the faster the opportunities for you to grow exhibit themselves. And so your life gets less stressful, less pressure filled, less conflict filled, and you see things for the truth of them. And what happens is, when you see the events that are possibly negative fallout or negative outcome, you don't even go there. You don't allow yourself to be sucked into that situation where you're tried and tested. You already know the consequence. And if it's negative, you choose just not to go there. You use your strengths to combat your weaknesses.
Wow, nicely said, Branch. So, what spiritual advice or life lessons can you give to the listeners to strengthen their faith, whether it's in God, in Allah? What can you tell the listeners, Branch?
Well, man asks God, "Why should I trust you?" And God replies, "Why would you not?" And that's the key pivotal point. If you're going to be successful in your life, whatever that looks like for you, you need to have a plan. And once you have that plan, you need to work that plan. And I'll give you a life example. In 1973 at Yale University, they asked all the graduating seniors how many had plans for their life and how many had written down those goals and those plans. And 20 years later, they did a follow-up survey, And the 3% who had a plan and wrote down the steps and the goals to make that plan happen were worth more than the other 97% combined. So first you've got to have the plan, right? And then you've got to have the steps to work that plan. But the quintessential question becomes, are you going to allow God to be part of that plan or not? And if you're willing to allow God, Allah, Vishnu, whoever your God is, if you're willing to allow him or her to be part of that plan, you're going to be more successful. Why? Because you're going to be more balanced. And in being balanced, you're going to exhibit and experience growth. And with that growth, you're going to be able to access the things and the events and the circumstances of the world to your benefit. You'll already have a sense of what works and what won't work from both your experiences and from the experiences of others in your life. Then the choice is simple. Am I going to make the choice or the decision that's in my best interest, where I'm coming from my better self and truthfully, morally, ethically, or am I going to continue to believe it's all about me and I'll do whatever I can or have to, regardless of the damage that I cause along the way? There's a lot of wealthy and well-off people who are not very happy in their lives. There's nothing that will fill that void in your heart more or better than being spiritually grounded. And that's part of life. That's something you just have to experience. People can talk about it and teach about it and suggest about it, but until you make that choice to travel the world's path or the spiritual path, that's the only way you know for yourself.
Wow, well said. Where can the listeners get a copy of your book or your books, or reach out to you for any speaking engagements?
Sure. Thanks for asking, Cleanne. I've got a website. I've got a YouTube channel. It's all in my name. Just Google my name or put in www.branch Isole, and all of those links will come up. My podcast links, my book links, everything I've written, my essays, it's all available. Just Google the name. If you go to the podcast link on the website, there's 4 free PDF read-only copies there of the core of what we've talked about today. Also, how to improve relationships, how to be a better leader in business. And for those who are interested in end times or last days prophecy, there's a section on that. So there's some free information you can download and read that'll give you the basics of all the things that I'm sharing and teaching.
Sounds great, Branch. What great information. And it's a lot to take in at one time, especially to people that do not have a faith or do not believe in something higher than themselves. So it was great having you on the show, Branch. And is there any last words that you would like to leave with the listeners?
I would. Thank you, Cleanne. If you've enjoyed our discussion, our conversation today, do me a favor. Go to the whatever you're listening on, Apple or Spotify, and leave a review and a rating for Cleanne. That way she can continue to bring guests on who have something to share for you in your life.
Sounds great.